I'm Sarah Williamson, and this is Going Long with FCLT Global. On this show, you'll learn what it means to be long-term from the top minds in global business and investing. Leaders from companies and investment organizations join us to discuss how they are leading their teams for the long run on issues including capital allocation, risk management, climate change, and sustainability. To learn more, visit our website at fcltglobal.org. Today, I'm joined by Robert Smith, founder, chairman, and CEO of Vista Equity Partners. Vista is one of the most successful technology investment firms globally, with more than $77 billion in assets under management. Robert is also the founding director and president of the Fund 2 Corporation, which is dedicated to preserving the African American experience. He's chairman of Carnegie Hall and chair of the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights. In April of this year, Robert launched the Southern Communities Initiative in partnership with Rich Lesser, CEO of the Boston Consulting Group, and Dan Schulman, CEO of PayPal. SCI aims to accelerate the deployment of corporate resources into 6 Southern communities that are home to approximately 50% of African Americans in ways that improve lives holistically and can be locally sustained. And of course, Vista is also a member of FCLT Global. So welcome, Robert. Thank you for joining me today.
Sarah, thank you for inviting me. Excited to be here.
So I'd love to just learn a little bit about, your journey and how you got to where you are today. So you founded Vista in 2000. As we said, it's a portfolio now of $77 billion of some of the world's largest technology companies. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you got from there to here?
Sure. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to share some time and share some insights with your listening group. For us, Vista, we are very focused on one key area, and it's an area called enterprise software. And I'd like to really, underscore, enterprise software is frankly the most productive tool that's been introduced in our business economy over the last 50 years and likely will be for the next 50. And for the last 2 decades or so, Vista's delivered really what I call a differentiated and disciplined approach to software investing and scaling our portfolio companies really to maximize how they operate and enhance their innovative capacity. The way we've done that is really built out a whole series of best practices that we engage with our entrepreneurs, our founders, and companies that we've taken private to ensure that they are maximizing their opportunity. The way I think about it is, we live in a world with a lot of silos of expertise, and we create a shared experience, then an ecosystem in order for our 70 plus companies going to 100 plus companies where they can use best practices from each other and things that we hone and refine. And our investment engine, frankly, has been stress tested, has been fine tuned to deliver this continuum of value creation for all the stakeholders. And it's important to underscore that stakeholders in our business. And so, with that, we think that shared experience, that collaborative nature, bringing in, new technologies, sharing those technologies, sharing those best practices, and frankly, ultimately, you end up sharing a network. I know of very few organizations where 70 CEOs of software companies can get together and they're not in conflict with each other. Or 70, chief marketing officers or chief sales officers or strategy officers can get together and talk about how they can address the needs of their markets, utilizing some of the experiences that the others in their our Vista family group can enable them to do more efficiently. So it's a very efficient way, I think, of actually delivering best practices in what is the most dynamic, highest productivity growth areas in investing.
So one of the things about software is that it changes so quickly. There are always, new ideas. But on the other hand, you've built this long-term group who can share ideas, and you've built this track record over a number of decades. How do you think about sort of being long-term in such a quickly changing business? It's obviously we're focusing capital in the long term, so we think about this, and sometimes we get the pushback of, well, you can't be long term unless you're in a stable business. Software is not a stable business, so how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the way to really unpack this is, enterprise software, different than what I'll call consumer software. The customers really have a reliance on the product. Once you implement one of these solutions, it often becomes the lifeblood or the fabric or the capillary or whatever you want to call it, of how work is done. And then you'll train thousands of employees on how to use it. And then it actually connects with, in some cases, tens or hundreds of different application software systems that connects your customers or end users or other employees or partners in your ecosystem. And so once you install it, it actually becomes a very resilient infrastructure. And in fact, when you think about it, it becomes the most reliable infrastructure of most businesses. Ultimately, it has workflows and pathways that are in some cases scripted. You may have some elements where you can be a little more free as a user of it, but it also creates massive efficiency. I mean, to give you an example, Sarah, we have in our portfolio companies, again, there's about 70 or so at any point in time. And we will do a study and say, okay, well, how productive is the software that we are selling to our customers? And when we do that study annually, in essence, there's about a 600% ROI, return on investment, on average, for the products that we sell to our customers. And this is our customers' benefit. And so you can see that's what creates a massive demand for this enterprise software. And so part of what we do is we enable our businesses, A, to operate more efficiently through these best practices, B, embrace methodologies and tools to expand their growth prospects at the same time as increasing their profitability characteristics. So, the rubric's cube of increasing growth and profitability, we think we've cracked it in many cases across our portfolio companies. And then the question is, how do you make sure it's sustainable? So the big thing we need to focus on is creating sustainable businesses. And a big part of that sustainability really comes from best practices, subject matter experts who are focused on those best practices.
So the way that you describe the enterprise software and how it all fits together, it sounded like I was talking to an engineer, and I understand that I am. And you've got a degree in chemical engineering from Cornell. You worked at Goodyear Tire and Rubber and Kraft Foods. I understand you have a couple of patents to your name. So how did you take the engineering background and translate that to the investing side? And how does that affect how you think about building an enterprise software company?
So that's a great question. It's interesting, the advantages of an engineering background in general and chemical engineering specifically is, we think about systems, ecosystems, and putting them in balance. Chemical engineering, we focus principally on what I call this whole mass balance equation, ensuring that as you were implementing a solution, that you didn't get out of balance and create massive amounts of waste or have massive inefficiencies in energy utilization. Well, if you think about what we're doing at FCLT, it's actually standing back and taking an approach of the ecosystem of engagement in finance and investing, and all the stakeholders are now part of the ecosystem. We're not just focusing on one particular component of it being the shareholders. It's how's it affecting our community, our planet, our employees. And so what we do at Vista in particular is actually stand back and look and say, okay, well, how do we create these balances in our ecosystem? How do we ensure that we are being the most productive inside our companies, but also being the most inclusive in terms of the employees, our board of directors, folks who we invite into our companies to participate in that value creation, and of course, look to deliver to our shareholders, the highest returns with the lowest loss ratio. And of course, when you actually think about companies in balance, you should have very low loss ratios. Otherwise, you're not necessarily investing. You're kind of picking stocks and hoping that you're picking well. So, what we're focused on, more so than any, is bringing that systemic, methodical approach to not only identifying companies that are, I'll call them, a bit out of balance or needing some efforts to be more in balance, and then drive in best practices and let them participate in our ecosystem to ensure that they're able to operate at the highest efficiency with the least amount of waste, with the highest degree of impact in the ecosystem that they're participating in. So that's really what I call the the paradigm overlay of what is, a systemic engineering approach to investing. And we've been very fortunate to now be able to do it at scale with over 500 plus investments over the last 21 years with very low loss ratios. We think that we continue to affect that quite efficiently in our marketplace.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. It opens up so many interesting questions. So one thing you mentioned in that was about climate and the impact of climate. Clearly, one of the things that is top of mind in the investing world today is both how climate change, the impacts of climate are affecting companies and investors and portfolios, and also the other way around, how companies are affecting the climate. So how have you been thinking about the climate transition? Where do you see the most traction here?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously, the most important issue that we as inhabitants of this planet have to be focused on, and not just to talk about it in the rhetoric, but what do we do about it? When I from the lens of our investors, for instance, these ESG importance and climate being the most important element on this one is the frequency and the depth of how our LPs are inquiring about this is accelerating. Years ago, I would see 5, 8, 10 of our 700 plus investors ask questions about it. A decade ago, now easily over half of our investor groups are spending tremendous amounts of time in the ESG materials in our data rooms and having very specific, pointed questions on what we're doing about it. In the sector that we operate in, which is information and communications technology, many people think this is just a very green sector generally, and for the most part it is. However, the emissions from our sector have in essence doubled from 2007 through today because of the power generation. And, importantly, our companies and Vista in particular, we acknowledge our role is more important to manage the operations and reducing our share of greenhouse gases. So to get very specific about what we do, 2 years ago, we became a carbon neutral firm for the first time and really began our public commitment to measurement, reduction, and investment in these offset projects. And we utilize a software measurement tool, which is very important to accurately track our greenhouse gas emissions and ensure that every one of our portfolio companies has an opportunity to also utilize these tools to understand what their greenhouse gas emissions are. And then from there, how do we now go drive forward with opportunities for them to offset it? Specifically, one of the things we've done, which I kind of look at, which hits a couple of things, is we found a renewable energy company called ClearLoop, and we utilize their capacity. And what they actually do is they find solar projects that align with our firm's objectives, including our commitment to fighting racial inequity. And we look to support various on-ramps for underserved communities to participate in new economies, leveraging new technologies, and using the offset. So this one in particular, it's in an industrial county across the road from Tennessee College of Applied Sciences in Jackson, Tennessee. And basically what we'll be doing is they're doing groundbreaking this week, where with our partnership, we'll be building another 510 new solar panels that will power 44 homes in the underserved communities. And that's going to give us the offset, a very specific community that gets very specific tangible benefits from the work in our partnership with them. We've also done things we're the first, or one of the first private equity firms, I think, maybe the first to join the Net Zero Asset Management Initiative. And that industry has about 87 signatories and are committed to emitting net zero greenhouse gas emissions across their investments. So these are the sorts of things that we're focused on. One of the most important, of course, is measurement. And then the second is, okay, what are you actually going to do about it? Third thing is, just ensuring that we're doing it across all of our portfolio companies. When we implemented this solution and across our portfolio company, started to really come together. We've now got, councils with over 100 of our portfolio company executives involved in this process. I think it's 140 or so as part of what we call a Sustainability Leadership Council. And we now have been integrating that across all of our companies, and we're looking for specific investments that actually can enhance ESG, and in this case, environmental initiatives across our portfolio. So, these are the things we're focused on. And then at the top level, we've created an ESG playbook for all of our board members, including our external board members. And we dedicate specific time in each quarterly board meeting to not only elevate the conversation, but to actually go through the specific understanding of where that company is, what our goals are, and what our plans and objectives are to getting to carbon neutral. So all of those things are, I call it a comprehensive solution approach that we like to take at Vista, and again, with the intent of really creating an ecosystem that is self-sustaining, that people view as not only important and impactful to our investors, but to all the stakeholders, including the communities that we're serving, including this global community that we're all focused on.
That makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like, just like the chemical engineer in you've created a system and trying to have some balance throughout the portfolio companies. So one of the things we've thought a lot about is governance, of course. Focusing Capital Long-Term does it. We do a lot on governance because we think it drives a lot of the decisions about how people behave, whether they're short or long term. And one of the important things, and you've mentioned this, is the governance of the portfolio companies, and the boards in particular, the diversity of those boards. And I know your team and ours have done joint work on this. So can you talk a little bit about how you incorporate, particularly through that governance lens, as you think about all those portfolio companies and all the decisions that they have to make? How do you make sure that you get that diverse perspective built in at each one of those board levels?
Sure, it is, again, critically important to create the right systemic approach to it. Kind of point one. Point two, provide the portfolio companies with resources and information and access. And then point three, you have to measure the outcomes. And then fourth, you have to actually tie people's performance objectives, bonuses, et cetera, to it. We do it within Vista. If you're a senior executive and you don't hit some of your DEI objectives, you actually don't vest into your ownership of the company. And I think that's one of the ways you get people focused. We've seen, thank goodness, a renewed sense of urgency globally across adopting DEI processes, and it's rare to see a company that doesn't want to be part of the change. But one of the issues is, how do you make the change? What do you need to do? And so what we want to continue to do is lead the way and support our companies and as and with Vista as the leader in how to do that. For example, one of the things we developed and pushed forward is an approach called conscious inclusion. It has two core components: a competency and then a learning journey. Because we've realized, as we've done our surveys and evaluation, there's a lot of folks who actually don't really understand how to do it or what to do, and some of the benefits of it. And so we introduced this almost 2 years ago as part of our year-end performance review process for all of our employees. And now it's been pushed out in a 3-part workshop across all of our portfolio companies. And, when I look today, the worlds that we live in, which are, private equity and software, in some respects are two of the least diverse in the way that they approach their markets and the way that they look. And I'm proud to say our workforce at Vista is made up of 44% women, 32% people of color. Our senior staff is about 22% women and 28% people of color. And what's interesting is, almost 70% of our boards have at least one female director. And some of our boards are majority female boards, and 85% of our boards have at least one person of color. So when you think about that, you got to lead by example, first off. And then second, you have to now provide tools and materials for, the portfolio companies to actually embrace this. So those are some of the elements that we're focused on. And, we then say, okay, how do we now create the right sort of external partnerships so that our companies see that we're not just kind of, walking the walk, but really, doing it in a way that ties Vista as a corporation and giving them other resources. I think about, ways to do it, and it is, who are the partners that we should communicate with, and who are the partners that we should really put resources behind and I just got off the phone call a couple minutes ago with the group that one of my groups that's working with, Business Roundtable and in driving some of these initiatives forward. So that's how we think about it internally. And then it's really a question of how we drive that across our portfolio companies and into the other communities that we're serving.
So it sounds like you're really doing this, fighting racial inequity in a couple of very distinct ways. One is just the way you run your business and trying to run it in a way that works. The other is some of these projects that you're working on. You mentioned the Business Roundtable. I know you've been involved in a number of these things. How do you think about the sort of the role of business in driving these? And can you talk a little bit about some of the projects that you have underway and bringing this sort of business mindset to those sorts of initiatives?
Sure, it's a great question, Sarah. In that, part of what's embedded in that question is how do you get corporate leaders to embrace the importance of it and to ensure that they're focused not only on this is an issue, but here are the ways to change it. And we're just fortunate in our time that there are just a number of corporate leaders and institutions who not only think it's important, but are putting real resources behind it. For instance, when I think about the work we're doing at the Business Roundtable we did last year, coming out on some of the activities, or World Economic Forum, where we're focused on everything from board diversity, and not to steal some of the thunder, but we'll be making announcements on how we're going to bring digital equality globally to literally billions of people, with large corporations and governments leading the way. In the US, it's the larger corporations that are really taking the forefront. In other parts of the world, it's the governments that are also driving the corporations and the companies to make these changes. One of the things in the US is, you have to also look at the ecosystem and who are the stakeholders. And one of the biggest sets of stakeholders are shareholders in these companies. And so I've been just pleased to be part of some work by the Treasurer of Connecticut, Sean Wooten. And what he's done is created a corporate call to action, which is a coalition of 18 of the largest asset managers, and get them all closely aligned to setting specific commitments around diversification of suppliers, investing in underserved communities, talent pipeline, et cetera, and looking to hold the corporations of which these asset managers are the largest owners of accountable. You see groups that are coming up and focusing on, how do you ensure purchasing is done in a way that's equitable? How do you make sure there's board representation that's done? Board Diversity Action Alliance is another one that I would point to. Companies like the Modern Leadership Initiative. So we've been working with a lot, which is a private equity firm principally, but we've been working with a lot of these groups to not only bring our best practices to them, but also to bring in an awareness more broadly about how important this is. And you can have diverse boards. I mean, we prove it. You can have a diverse diverse operating teams and senior managers, and still have lowest loss ratio type dynamics in your funds. But you just actually have to put things in place, and you have to put pipeline and training and opportunity in place. And a big part of what I always think about are these opportunity ramps. How do you create opportunity ramps for people who don't have access to now have access, training, capacity, mentorship, and enablement? And I think that level of awareness is really starting to permeate through corporate America in various constructs. And I'm excited that we're going to see and are seeing some real changes there.
So how long do you think, how do we keep the momentum up for long periods of time on these sorts of efforts? Because it feels to me, as somebody who's also been interested and worked on these issues for many years, is we're at a critical time. There's been a mobilization over the last couple of years in light of a number of the events in this country and others. And there is enthusiasm, there is motivation, there's momentum, but we know it's hard. You just talked about opportunity ramps. That takes time. There's building development that takes time for people. Lots of people like to fix a problem right now and wrap it up with a bow and move on. It's unlikely this problem will work like that. So how do you think that we keep that long-term work that it's going to take to rectify some of these historic inequities and get companies and investors who haven't built that pipeline or are sort of starting on the back foot to where they want to be.
Yeah, no, you're right. It takes sustained effort for any change to be long lasting. And the sustained effort can't just come from one group. FCLT has a marvelous mission to drive this forward. In addition to, I'll call it, components or parts of other, firms or groups like, Business Roundtable, World Economic Forum, et cetera, say, hey, this is a priority. And now we're starting to bring, coalitions of leaders together that are representing large corporations and governments. I was on the phone this morning with an industry group leader who leads, frankly, one of the largest, call it telecom councils outside the US. I mean, literally over 25 countries participate in this council. And, he is leading the effort to ensure that they're all aware of what we are doing and saying, okay, how do I amplify the message? And now how do I get my constituent group to contribute as well? That's how we get this done. I think we have to all just keep kind of putting our shoulder to it. We do understand the importance of it. The data is all there. The statistics all support why it's important to have diverse and effective management teams. And it's important that we also have leadership from shareholders, from boards of directors that underscore the importance and put behind it the incentives to get it right. And if you don't get it right, you don't participate in what is the upside of what that opportunity is. And it does take time, but we all have to kind of keep pushing our shoulder against the wheel here of opportunity, because if we don't, I fear that we could have some very disastrous and troubling dynamics that will inhibit growth for everyone and inhibit opportunity for everyone, and then we'll end up retreating, I think, into a less optimistic environment. So, I've never been more optimistic about it because I've never seen as many global leaders looking to participate on critical issues of climate change, ESG, and DEI all together and putting true resources against it. So that's what I'm excited about.
No, it is. I think it is a really exciting time. I think FCLT is 5 years old now, and we started 5 years ago. A lot of people were more in the, well, that's not my job category. A lot of people with some of the, the thinking, leading edge thinkers got this. And obviously our members did, but many others said, yeah, I'm not really interested in that. Nobody says that anymore. So I think that's one of the things that's exciting. It's gone from, yes, I don't know about that, to I know it's important, to how, to your point. Now it's about, okay, how do I get it done? So I think that is terrific. One of the ways that one of the questions is always, is it easier or to get this done in a private format, private equity backed company, or in a public company? You talked a lot about the shareholders of a public company. Obviously, in a private equity environment, you've got a bit more control. What advice do you have for building on your private equity experience? What advice do you have for your public company compatriots who do have this broad array of shareholders, some of whom care about these issues, some of whom don't, some are in this country, that country, the other country, some are index funds, some are active funds. How do you help them out?
Sure. If we start with the public company dynamic, and I have a chance to meet with and talk to public company CEOs and executives all the time for various reasons. Some are customers, some are utilizing our software and looking to partner, et cetera. I say it's quite simple. In the world that we live in around software, I like to say, there's 7.5 billion people on this planet, and there's only 29 million of us who actually know how to write code. Right now, you think about that, and you stand there as a public company saying, I need to digitize my business, my economy. I can't find the people. And I say, well, okay, well, that tells you right there, you now need to train people. You need to build infrastructure. You need to, take advantage of people who are there, who are from a diverse background and get them engaged in the process of becoming, more effective in this world of technology. That's an economic imperative. In the U.S. in particular, we're being outstripped, depends upon whose numbers you look at, 5-1 or 10-1 in terms of the graduation rates of our technically trained people. So we have to think about how do we train the people that we have today to now be more productive, more digitally enabled to participate in the economy as producers of digital technology, not just consumers of it. So there's a basic economic imperative that I would point to. In other countries, one of the issues they have is a wide group of young people, in many cases, who don't necessarily view, optimistically about what the world holds for them. But if they become programmers and, can now produce products and start off with their own country for their own needs, and then ultimately regions, et cetera, they now become part of a digital economy. There's still just this huge, gap of opportunity and massive amount of demand for technical training. And we can all sit here and say, I wish I could solve it tomorrow, but it takes time. You have to train people. Now, not everyone needs to go to a 4-year university. They can go to the coding camps and boot camps and all those sorts of things. And so when I talk to these senior executives, they can try to go poach people and pay them higher amounts of money, but guess what? You do that and people do that to you. And I'm not sure that's necessarily a very efficient way to do it long term. But start off with internships. I had a conversation with the CEO of a very large insurance company, 2 years ago. And I said, start with taking interns. And he took 10. And this year he called me and said, Robert, I want to take 100. I didn't realize, okay, in essence, you get a free look at these students, and, you now, and of course, when you get to diverse students around it, you now have the opportunity to actually solve a couple of, kill a couple of birds with one stone through these internship programs, fellowship programs, exposure programs that actually don't cost a lot in a corporate sense, but create potentially long-term sustainable creation of effective workers and executives. And then within your organization, one of the things I think we do exceptionally well at Vista is training within our own companies. We've got training for onboarding, people, training for people who've been, at the companies for a few years. Some are 2 levels below the CEO for the C-level suites and the C-level. And that pyramid of training, we think, is a way to not only create, longevity and call it loyalty, but efficacy. And when people see that you're investing in them, they will invest back in you. So those are the messages that I give, that we've got some proven data around how effective it is for our companies, that any company, not just public or private, but public, can actually use. Private companies have, I think, greater degrees of flexibility. And, it's important for them to also think about how do you then teach and engage in not just the training of your own group of employees, but the community. And for us, for instance, we do, hour of code. And I think we get over 20,000 students, to teach them coding. My employees literally go into the schools and teach them how to code and provide systems and teach the teachers and tools. And, I think we've awarded over $500,000 in scholarships, et cetera, across our portfolio companies to help these students actually understand the importance of becoming digitally enabled, and inspiring them to go on and get the degrees and the experience that can actually help not only our companies, but in this context, call it the corporate community as well.
Well, it sounds like you have really woven this into your companies and your philosophy. And I'm sure those people who go in and teach kids how to code, they feel better after doing. They get something out of doing that. You mentioned that philanthropy efforts liberate the human spirit. So how do you think about both, your own philanthropy, but also this kind of weaving it into the culture of these companies and bringing the fruits of your labor, but also the skills to these underserved communities? Is that what makes you optimistic? You do seem very optimistic about the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's when I have a chance to spend time with our senior executives, not just at Vista, but at portfolio companies, and what they're doing, and how you hear it in their voices when they come back from an hour of code, or when they actually, I just remember, one case of ours, one of our companies, Finastra actually is in one of the large fintech companies out there. And, we found in the early stages of, the pandemic, and the US government wanted to start to deliver some loans through what's called the Paycheck Protection Program, Paycheck Protection Program, PPP program. And we discovered a couple of things. One, 70% of African-American communities didn't have access to a branch bank. And so those companies, those businesses in those communities actually didn't have access to actually go get some of these PPP loans. So we had a team at Finastra, 200 engineers literally worked around the clock to deliver a solution so that we could implement that into what we call the capillary banking system. So these are the CDFIs and MDIs, not the large branch banks that are in those communities. And they got that system up and delivered almost 100,000 loans across 800 lenders, which increased, in some cases, the transaction capacity of those lenders by 3,000%. And these are loans that are like $8,000, $10,000 that only technology can enable, companies to do effectively and save literally tens of thousands of jobs, okay, and families through doing that. Well, that's leverage. So when you talk to that team after they've done that, I mean, you see the elation, you see, the importance of how they were able to liberate or take their technology to create a solution that literally liberated human spirits. It created an uplift in a time that was just downtrodden for a lot of businesses. They had to shut their doors, they couldn't transact, and now they had capital to pay their people. And many of these folks, in one in particular, I remember, there's an average of 3 employees, per company, average, I think was $11,000 was what they got for the, the PPP program. And that saves lives and kids and for people to be able to get food, et cetera. So that's how we think about it. And, I'm just excited that, that DNA is part of not only Vista, but our portfolio companies and the way that they embrace, really embrace their opportunity to, I call it, honor our shareholders by delivering good work that creates great values in the communities that we serve. So I'm excited about that.
Well, that is probably a good place to wrap this up, because I think that is an inspirational message for our listeners, for companies that are trying to figure out how do they do well and do good, for people who are optimistic about the long term. Sometimes it's easy to get trapped in the day-to-day, but kind of lifting yourself up a little bit and looking down the road and thinking about the opportunities that we have is terrific. So thank you for your leadership and your philanthropy, for the support of FCLT Global, and really just for your drive. So and for your time today. So thank you.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much. And again, I can't say enough about what you all are doing and what we're doing at FCLT. And I think we all have realized that we are blessed to be a blessing for so many. And I'm just excited to see how much energy, effort, resources is going in to really changing the world in a positive way, and only the way that we can as corporate leaders. So thank you for your leadership, and excited to see us get a number of these things completed in our lifetimes.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Going Long with FCLT Global. Be sure to hit subscribe to get new episodes every other Monday. To learn more, visit our website at fcltglobal.org.